Not only is this space packed, we have 2 overflow rooms packed. Let's say hello to them as well. Wherever they are in the overflow, make them feel at home. And you are standing room only. I'm going to stand for the entire event in solidarity with you. Yes. A lot of people didn't recognize me tonight because I'm wearing a tie. I only wear a tie in the presence of Tishy. So this is the first time I've worn a tie. Welcome everyone. I hope you're ready for a great evening of conversation and debate with a really superb panel on our stage. Let me introduce them to you. From the left, politically or geographically, I'm not sure, but on the left, Daniel McCrossan, SDLP MLA for West Tyrone, a lawyer by trade. He's his party's spokesperson on Brexit, which could become useful in a moment. Next to Daniel is Doug Beattie from the Ulster Unionist Party. He was elected MLA for Upper Bann in 2016, following a long career in the British Army, during which he served here and in Bosnia, Kosovo, Iraq and Afghanistan. Much of that story is told in his best-selling memoir, An Ordinary Soldier. Leo Varadkar is the Taoiseach. Leader of Fine Gael, of course, and has served as TD for Dublin West for the past 12 years, following a professional career as a doctor, which may also be useful tonight. We just don't know how this is going to go. Next to An Taoiseach, Mary Lou McDonald, leader of Sinn Féin. Has served as TD for Dublin Central for the past 8 years, having previously represented Dublin in the European Parliament. Brendan Smith is chair of Fianna Fáil's parliamentary party, having served as TD for Cavan Monaghan since 1992. He's held a variety of ministerial offices, including Justice Minister, and is chair of the Joint Committee on Foreign Affairs and Trade in the Oireachtas. Gregory Campbell from the DUP has been MP for East Londonderry. He's got a busload in from East Londonderry for the past 18 years, and he's also represented the constituency in the Northern Ireland Assembly for 20 years. And Naomi Long, leader of the Alliance Party. Recently elected a member of the European Parliament. I think they're going to applaud every clause in the introduction. Having previously served as an MLA, a Member of Parliament, a local councillor and Lord Mayor of Belfast. She just needs to become a TD to get the full house. Let's welcome our panel. I'm the only person in the house who knows what the questions are. You are going to participate, I hope, by applause. No booing. No booing. As Boris would say, don't boo the great man. Don't do that. Don't do that. But applause, yes, or quizzical looks in your face, and I'll identify that as we go. Let's go to the first question. Whatever your view on the merits of Brexit, 3 years after the 2016 referendum, we are in a mess. Who is responsible for the mess? And what's the way out of it? An Taoiseach.
Ar dús dús war íomh go léir an Palmer Beach gan seo bheith fearsta enough agus gur mágat an fáilte agus láidir. It's a real privilege to be here. Take part in the Leaders Debate, and last year was a real honour to launch the programme for this event here last year, and they're promised I'd come back. I did get some criticism down south for being associated with this event, but I'm really glad that today I see people from all political parties in the north and political parties because this is a great community, and this is a great event, and it doesn't belong to anyone, it belongs to all of us, so thank you so much for having me. On Brexit, I'm kind of keen not to play the blame game on this, and I'm not going to. I just will state a historical fact that this all began when a referendum happened in the United Kingdom, and the majority of people in the UK, albeit not in Northern Ireland and Scotland, decided to vote to leave, and that wasn't our decision, but it's one that we've been trying to deal with ever since. I think there's been a bit of revisionism recently, almost suggesting that the withdrawal agreement, including the backstop, was something invented in Brussels or Dublin, or something that was that we tried to impose on the House of Commons. And I was there for the past 2 years, and I know that the withdrawal agreement and the backstop was something that we co-designed and developed and negotiated with a lot of trade-offs with Prime Minister May and her government. And once the position was taken that not only was the UK going to leave the EU, but it was also going to leave the single market, was also going to leave the customs union, and also wouldn't accept the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, it closed off so many options. And the withdrawal agreement was very much crafted around those red lines, and was the best outcome that we could get. And all it really is about, in my view, is setting a floor under the future relationship. Because we know once the UK leaves the European Union, we're going to have to negotiate a free trade agreement, we're going to have to negotiate a new economic and security partnership, and we're going to want to. The UK and the European Union will want that. And what the backstop has been able to do is set a floor under that future relationship. It gives us the guarantee that no matter what else may happen as a consequence of Brexit, we won't have any restrictions, north, south or east, west. People will still be able to travel freely, still be able to participate in each other's labour markets, will still be able to trade freely with no tariffs or quotas or checks or controls. So it's really just trying to preserve the status quo as the minimum and the floor of the future relationship. And in many ways that's why we're committed to seeing it through. I had a really good meeting today with business leaders from across Northern Ireland. I had lunch with them, the Northern Ireland Chamber of Commerce and also the Dublin Chamber of Commerce. And they all came from different businesses. Some of them were bottling plants, some were in tourism, some were in the agri-food sector and so on. And they all said one thing to me which should have been obvious but really rings true when people say it to you. And that was the one thing that they really want, the one thing citizens and businesses really want, is a bit of certainty. After 3 years of not knowing what's going to happen next, to have some certainty about what the future holds. And certainly leaving with no deal doesn't do that, because it leaves all the questions unanswered. We would have to talk again about citizens' rights, financial settlement, the solution to the border, have all that sorted before we enter talks about a free trade agreement and so on. But also having a withdrawal agreement without the backstop doesn't give them certainty either, because it just leaves those important questions to be sorted out in a 2 or 3 year transition period. And in many ways that kind of helped to convince me as to why we need to make sure that that remains part of the withdrawal agreement. So not into blaming anyone, because I don't think that's helpful.
Well, could you comment on Michael Gove, who's not afraid to blame someone, who said today that it was the intransigence of the European Union, really, that is responsible for this stalemate. The British government, he says, is ready to talk. The European Union doesn't want to talk.
Yeah, well, that's not true. What the European Union has said is that we are willing to talk. I've invited Prime Minister Johnson to come to Dublin to talk about some of these issues and share with him my analysis and our shared analysis, or maybe our opposing analysis as to how we got to this point. And I hope he'll take that invitation up. I'm sure he will in the next couple of weeks. And the European Union has said that we can certainly talk about the future relationship, about the joint political declaration on that is still open for negotiation.
But not the withdrawal agreement?
No, but bear in mind what's in the future relationship, in the joint political declaration, is, for example, the alternative arrangements. And we've agreed that alternative arrangements, if they can be properly developed and tested, can supersede the backstop. So yes, we can talk about those as part of the joint political declaration. And certainly in the past, when Prime Minister May came to us looking for declarations and clarifications and interpretations, they were available. So I don't think we're being intransigent. What I think is somewhat disappointing anyway, is this view that we seem to be getting from London, that we won't talk to the European Union until you drop the backstop. And that's not a good starting point, I think, for further talks, but we're willing to talk.
Gregory Campbell.
Thanks. It's good to be back at the West Belfast Festival. Probably 20 years ago I may not have said that, but it is good. In fact, when I was on the way in there, I was looking at some of the things on the walls on the way in, and I took exception to some of them, and I was offended by them, and I was just wondering, where do I get my £10,000, please? Do I send that to the organisers or whatever? We'll park that for the moment. The question was about blame, and I do agree with Leo. I don't think it's a good thing to constantly look back.
Well, then, how do we get out of the mess?
Well, let just very briefly before to answer the question, and then we'll move on to that. If you look back before the referendum, David Cameron, the previous Prime Minister, went to Europe to try and see if there could be some changes to the way the EU operates. Because many people, not just in the UK, but in different countries in Europe, we've seen a manifestation of that in the Euro elections recently, many people were concerned at the direction of travel that the EU had. So Cameron made reference to that and said, look, can we see some sort of change of direction? He got no change out of the EU at all. He was sent packing, and that's why the referendum happened. And we know what happened then. Now, since that, we've had the EU elections and this massive shift to the right across Europe, across many nations across Europe. So when you look at what the response of the EU was, firstly to Cameron, and secondly to the shift that is existing within the current EU, forgetting about the UK for a moment, they then promptly went even more Europhile in the appointments of people that they selected in the past 6 weeks. So Europe doesn't seem to get the message that people don't like this political project that is the EU. People resent and resile from that. And that's a bad place to start. But that's dealt with, that's done. Hopefully that can change. I think if we move into the position that Leo has alluded to, that there are no preconditions in terms of discussions and talks, that's a better place to start than saying, look, this is what's on the table, that's what's off the table, and there the twixt shall meet.
No preconditions on the political agreement, but the withdrawal agreement is fixed.
Either you have discussions on a no preconditions basis, or you don't. If there are discussions on a no preconditions basis, that's good. If there are conditions, that's not so good. That's where we are now. Let's move, let's try and get a deal. I don't think anybody here tonight, I hope nobody here tonight, and not very many outside it, are going to actively advocate for a no-deal Brexit. Nobody's going to advocate that. And we don't want to end up there by default. I think we're more likely to end up there if people take hard and fast positions about what the next steps are. We have 6 or 7 weeks to try and get a resolution. Let's get the resolution and get a good deal Brexit.
Naomi Long.
Well, everybody said that they don't want to apportion blame, and I would love to say the same, but I'm going to anyway, just since that's what we were actually asked. I have some people that could say Boris, because I think a lot of the negativity around the EU, a lot of the fact that people felt that it wasn't delivering anything serious, that it wasn't doing a good job, and all the rest, you can trace back to the ridiculous articles that he invented when he was the EU correspondent for the Times and the Telegraph, and just made stuff up about bendy bananas and all sorts of other things. That kind of ridicule actually is, we do it in politics all the time, but it's actually really corrosive to the body politic, because it makes people think that these institutions don't matter and that they're not serious institutions. And that's effectively what happened with the EU, and it is a serious institution and it does matter, and we know that now that we're teetering on the brink of leaving. So you could trace it back to him. He's done okay out of it though. You could say Theresa May, I think, triggering Article 50 before she had consensus in Parliament about what Parliament could sign up to and couldn't sign up to. The country was divided. It was very clear that she took over at a time when there was no clear direction. It was a narrow majority in favour. You had Scotland and Northern Ireland opposed. You had England and Wales in favour. You had this division in Parliament between head and heart, where people were afraid for their seats. felt they had to go through with it, but in their head knew it was a stupid decision. So you've all of that going on, and instead of taking time to try and build consensus first, then trigger Article 50 and go with a plan, she triggered Article 50 and then did her thinking out loud around the negotiating table, and that's not the way to get a good deal. But I'm going to plump for David Cameron, because of all of the people in all of this, I think he was the most spectacularly irresponsible. I think putting this up for a public vote without any plan, without any conception of what the alternative would be, without any strategy, and just doing it to save the skin of his own party was irresponsible. And I think what was doubly irresponsible was having dug the hole for the rest of us to fall into, to just leave everybody else to sort the mess out. So I would say of the three of them, David Cameron to me is the one that I personally blame most.
No, just briefly. No, I don't. That was very cruel. Stop that. Just briefly, in terms of how we get out of this, and by mess I mean the stalemate that we're in, this difficulty we're in.
Well, I mean, there are now only two ways out. Either we get a deal or we crash out without one. And crashing out without one requires no effort whatsoever. It will happen automatically.
What about an extension?
On the 31st of October. It will happen automatically if an extension isn't sought. How we get out of it, I think we need an extension. I think it's clear Parliament aren't ready to leave on no deal. I think it would be wrong for the Prime Minister to take the UK out of the EU. He has no mandate for no deal. I mean, even in the 2017 elections, the people who voted for the parties, the majority voted for parties that were advocating a deal. So he has no mandate for no deal. So I think he needs to get the extension, and then I think we need to sit down and work through the issues. I personally don't think Brexit can be achieved and can be successfully achieved, because I think Brexit is a negative. But I absolutely want to make sure that if it's going to happen, that we're not going to be the ones carrying the worst of the damage. And that's my job in terms of trying to protect people in Northern Ireland from that damage.
Let me jump over to this side of the table. Doug Beattie.
Well, it's great to be here, first of all. I've got to say it's my first time across here and the first time at the festival. And
Are you putting a claim in as well for the posters, by the way?
I'm just hoping my car, which is abandoned up the road, doesn't get rammed. But I mean, it's genuinely good to be here and sit with such people here. I know I'm not the big draw to this table, but nevertheless, it's worthwhile having an input. I think it's very easy to blame people and demonise people, whether that's David Cameron or Boris or Farage or An Taoiseach or even Barnier. I think that's very simple to do that, but we're playing politic here, and this is what we're involved in, and everybody has to play the politics of Brexit. And here's where I lay the blame. I lay the blame on those people who think this is a game of bluff. For those people whose only sole tactic in this whole thing is to say, we'll catch his bluff. And the British government are doing it. The British government are saying, don't worry, we'll take us right up to the wire, we'll call our bluff and we'll get a deal. And now we get from the European Union, they're saying is, do you know what, we don't think Boris is bluffing. I cannot believe that people are playing with the lives of citizens of the European Union, of the United Kingdom, and particularly on this island of Ireland, with your lives. I cannot believe it. All for a game of bluff. But there is a reality here, and people need to look at it, because where I can absolutely see why people want the backstop, because they want to protect themselves and the EU wants to protect itself, the reality is this: for the majority of constitutional unionists, the backstop is not acceptable and never will be acceptable. I voted Remain. I foresaw this. But I'm a Democrat and I work to the democratic will of the people of the United Kingdom. And I cannot encounter having a backstop in any shape or form that will override my part within that United Kingdom. So the question for me is this: is the backstop worth no deal Brexit? Is it worth it? Right now we have the ability to get rid of the backstop or amend the backstop, which is a meeting in the middle, so that we have a means of getting out of it. And if we do that, then we have 3 years to come up with a solution. If we don't, we got 3 months and then we crash out. And we will crash out.
Doug, why do you believe we've got that ability when the European Union says it's not for negotiation?
This is the point that I'm saying. Everybody is saying that. We're in a position here where nobody is willing to move. The UK government are saying they're not willing to move. Boris is bullish. Trust me, I don't trust him. He's bullish. He is bullish. But he is saying he will not move. The European Union are saying they will not move. We have two rocks here which have to move in some shape or another. If we'd have taken this view with the Belfast Agreement, we would still be killing each other right now. What we did is we moved. We moved to the middle. We found the common ground.
So what's the compromise in this?
Well, here's the common ground. Is if we have to have a backstop, let's make it time limited. Let's make a backstop time limited so that nobody feels trapped. And people can say, you're not trapped. They can say that. But if people feel trapped, then they feel trapped, and that's a reality. And here's the point. If we go into a negotiation, a honest, fair, decent negotiation for 3 years with a backstop, and come the end, one of the 27 veto that agreement, we're stuck with no democratic representation for the people of Northern Ireland, or for the people of the United Kingdom. And that's a reality. So Spain, for example, can say, do you know what? We're not going to sign up to this deal. Why? Because we want a deal on Gibraltar. The French can say, we're not going to sign up to this because we want a deal on fishing. Ireland may turn around and say, we're not going to sign up to this because we want you to set a date for a border poll. I'm not saying they're saying that, but I'm just saying that's hypothetical. So there's no way any unionist will buy into that. Simple fact that we won't. So we have to come up with common ground and meet in the middle to come up with something that's good for the people throughout Europe and the United Kingdom.
And just to be clear, Boris Johnson's already rejected a time-limited backstop, and he's rejected a unilateral exit from the backstop. So they're off the table already at this point. But let me come to Mary Lou McDonald. Your analysis and the way out, Mary Lou.
So, time intach sásta devan. So, I'm great to be here. Every year you imagine the Féile can't get better, and then it does. This year is no different. So, okay, let's not play the blame game, because that ultimately we're so far into all of this now that we need to figure out how we navigate very, very dangerous waters. But let's just identify very, very clearly the responsible party. And the responsible party is the Tories. So, I am going to agree with Gregory Campbell. Nobody faint. This may be uniquely an occasion where I agree with Gregory. You see, there is absolutely no doubt that there are problems with the European project, and it's more than bendy bananas and those stories, those makey-uppy stories that Boris came up with. There is an alienation from the European project. That's why really good, decent, working class communities in the north of England and in the old mining villages in Wales voted for Brexit. Like, the Tories didn't come up with this as some taking a stand for equality or for working class people or for social progress. This is the Tory boys and girls making a power grab to take that which resides in Brussels back to themselves. And I think there is a lesson to be learned from Brexit, and if the European elites aren't willing to listen, to really listen to the democratic voices of people right across the continent, this project is in big, big trouble. That said, Brexit belongs to the Tories. Repeat, Brexit belongs to the Tories. And An Taoiseach may not be in the business of the blame game or pointing fingers, but I can tell you, Leo, they're pointing their fingers at you, and they're doing that very, very wrongly. They're also pointing their fingers at Barnier. I mean, 3 years have been spent finally combing through the detail of what makes possible Brexit, beyond this mindless mantra of Brexit means Brexit. And in fairness to officials at the continental level, they went through in painstakingly detail, as they do, every iota, every detail, every directive, every regulation, and they came up with the backstop. Not to annoy unionism, not to annoy you, Doug, but they were asked, how do we protect our All-Ireland economy? How do we protect jobs on this island? How do we ensure that the Good Friday Agreement arrangements aren't entirely upended? And they came up with what you could describe as the least worst option. The backstop is not ideal, far from it. Even with it, Brexit is going to be really hard and damaging for this island. But without it, we have a mess of enormous proportions. I think it's important to remind unionism that the majority of people here in the north of Ireland voted to remain. And if I could say to Doug, and I say this not to be confrontational with you, friend, but just to, you see, you can't have it both ways. You can't say that you march to the beat of the democratic drum, of democratic opinion on the one hand, and then say, but however, in these set of circumstances we set aside this vote, particularly because the whole new dispensation here on this entire island is on the basis of consent, isn't it? That's what I understood. I know Republicans got very, very lengthy lectures and tutorials for many years about consent and the value of it. And this was supposed to be hardwired into our political arrangements. So here's the bottom line. If it is a thing that Boris Johnson insists on walking off the edge of the cliff, if he insists on Brexiting in a hard way Britain, well, he can't wreck Ireland in the process, and we need to be very, very determined about that. I think the single most important thing as political leaders and elected people on this island that we can do at this time is to set aside a lot of the differences that we have, and to say with one clear voice that our economy will not be wrecked, our peace agreement will not be wrecked, our prospects will not be wrecked, and the backstop is the bottom line. There's no way around this. Final thought, William. The Europeans have said, yes, we'll talk. And of course they'll talk. I mean, Boris Johnson knows this. I mean, he's very good at the bluff and the bluster, but he's nobody's fool. He knows that to be the case. But from the very, very outset of this Brexit process, remember, 3 things were put on the table as the opening issues. They were the issue of money, the divorce settlement. They were the issue of citizens' rights across, and that was as much to protect British nationals living on the continent as vice versa. And the third issue was Ireland. So if anybody imagines that there is going to be a last-minute manoeuvre to damage this country, they're barking up the wrong tree. And I hope Boris Johnson, because he clearly doesn't listen to opinion on the island of Ireland, I hope he's heard Nancy Pelosi. I really hope that he has heard, I hope he's heard Richie Neal. And I hope he has heard the American administration, who have skin in this game too, say to him very directly, if you damage Good Friday, if you damage Ireland, forget about your trade agreement. It's not going to happen. And it might be that kind of pressure, William, that gets us out of this mess.
Thank you very much. Brendan Smith.
Gormagad agus mar úirtam Taoiseach Tá Fíomhaíoch as up den dúra bheith ag an agad seo agus Tá Fíomhaíoch freisin as up den fáilte don choláiste néomhuiire an tróna seo. Firstly, with regard to a number of points that have already been made, you had 40 years and more of constant negativity in a lot of the British tabloid media, in particular in regard to the European Union. The bendy bananas were mentioned. Mr. Johnston also brought in the kippers quite recently in regard to the parcelling requirements for posting kippers, and that was a British government regulation. So we can imagine the amount of disinformation that has been put out there to the public at large. Mr. Cameron called, he put a commitment in his manifesto for the 2015 election in regard to a referendum that would be seen by a lot of political observers as dealing with what it may have been seen as a threat from UKIP, whatever format that party was in at that particular time. He called the referendum then without any preparation or information being put out there in regard to the consequences of if or no decisions. So then if you go on to the parliamentary element of this, Mrs May then, as leader of government in April 2017, when she had a working majority in Parliament, she called an election based on opinion polls that put her something like nearly 20% ahead of Mr Corbyn at that particular time. Now the electorate made up their own mind and she came back in a much weakened position. And I think most leaders of government, if they have a working majority and if they're in the middle of trying to implement a major decision, a major project, I think they will continue with their working majority to ensure that they got their necessary legislative proposals through Parliament, etc. So I think that was a terrible political flaw from Mrs May's point of view in regard to the calling of that election. Gregory mentioned that the European Union is just a political project. It's not just a political project. Look at the importance of the single market and how it affects so many aspects of all our daily lives, not just in the area of trade and business, but in the area of workers' rights, in the area of the environment. And Mr Johnston then, the Prime Minister, has spoken about dealing with the backstop issue on the basis of technology that doesn't exist. Now, I don't know how you could be in serious negotiations with the European Union when you're talking about technology solving a problem and that technology doesn't yet exist, or if it ever would exist in the future, we don't know either. Could I also say that the one political mandate that all of us have throughout all of this island is to implement the Good Friday Agreement. There were referenda north and south on the 22nd of May 1998 following the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. That agreement was endorsed by 94% plus of the electorate in the south and 72.4% I think in Northern Ireland. An overwhelming mandate for that agreement, both north and south. And that was the first time since 1918 that all of us on this island had the opportunity to vote on the one question on the one day. It behoves all of us, and particularly the two governments as co-guarantors of that agreement is upheld and that there would be no diminution in any aspects of the working of that agreement. And that's absolutely mandatory to ensure that when this Brexit process is complete, that there's no damage done to the Good Friday Agreement. That's absolutely essential, and it's one that we have to ensure. The uncertainty was mentioned by Naomi. I've had the privilege of representing two of the southern Ulster counties, Cavan Monaghan, since 1992. Every day, particularly in the last few weeks, and I mentioned to An Taoiseach, businesses that had plans for expansion and even just some consolidation, they are shying away from making decisions now. And unfortunately, some of them reversing decisions they had to take on additional employees. That uncertainty is out there and it's doing awful damage to our economy, both north and south.
Thank you very much. Daniel McDougall.
Thank you very much. I know it's very good to be here and part of Féile and to see such a great crowd. When Colin Eastwood asked me to do this today, he says, don't worry, there's a good gathering there, and I nearly took a heart attack when he came through the door to see such numbers. In relation to, so thanks Colin if you're watching wherever you're at. In relation to
Brexit, where is he? Where is he, by the way? No.
Unavailable for comment.
Okay.
In relation
Enjoy
to Brexit,
the margarita.
I think it's clear to be said that Brexit has absolutely changed everything. And I remember in the immediate aftermath of the referendum result, I walked into my late grandfather's house, and a man who what many would call a dormant nationalist, who never really talked about politics in front of us or anything else, said, that's it, this has changed everything. A united Ireland will happen. Brexit will be a disaster. And at the time, because there was so much uncertainty about what actually Brexit meant, because there were so many lies and untruth told, it was very hard to see just how messy things could potentially become. And I think over 2 years on, I think we've realised just the consequences of a very poorly managed process and the chaos that has gone on at Westminster. Westminster is in a state of decay, an absolute chaos. Parties are fighting with each other. The government was a mess. We've seen David Cameron call that referendum and call that referendum simply because he didn't go his own way, without any preparation, any planning, any roadmap, simply came out and called a referendum on one of the most serious issues that we've ever faced, in a situation that has put this place into huge uncertainty. He should have learnt a few things from the SNP and Scotland when they had called their referendum, because certainly they planned it very, very well.
What's the way out, though, Daniel?
Well, first of all, to blame firmly lays in the hands of the Tories. I think Mary Lou has clearly articulated that. You've got Theresa May and Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson, for the last number of weeks, and certainly throughout the campaign, has been full of bluff and bluster. His big red bus has gone missing, and he has been left very red-faced in that. But I'm very, very concerned about Boris Johnson and his reckless approach, and obviously his cabinet of extreme Brexit lunatics, for want of a better description, who have no concern for this place, have no concern for the island of Ireland, no concern for a peace process, no concern for the Good Friday Agreement, and are adamant to cause all sorts of destruction in their path. This is about England. It's not about Scotland. It's not about Northern Ireland. This is about England, and it's very clear to be seen that when it comes to the United Kingdom, they don't actually care as long as they get their way around Brexit.
Thank you very much. All right. So those are the longest answers of the evening. You're laying out your stall. I want quicker answers. You want quicker answers? Shorter answers and more. We're stuck in diesel now. So talk to each other. Put your hand up. I'll come to you. But I'm moving to the next question. Oh no, hang on a minute, Tish. You can't pull rank on me.
I can have two short reflections on that, if I may.
All right.
And I think.
Now I'm going to have to give Gregory a reflection as well. You see, this is what happens.
Party of esteem for that.
All right.
I totally agree with Gregory and Mary and others that the European project is far from perfect. That we need to bring it closer to citizens. That we need to deliver on social Europe. That we need to act on things that people really care about, like climate change and so on. But it would be remiss of me not to point out that the European project over the past 70 years has probably been one of the most successful political projects that we've ever had. It brought about 70 years of peace on a continent that was constantly at war. It gave us four freedoms. European citizenship, that freedom to travel anywhere from Athens to Achill, to study at any university you want to access healthcare if you need to, in any European country, and gave us a platform by which we could have common workers' rights, gender rights and environmental rights, that instead of every country racing to the bottom to compete with each other, actually set a minimum floor and a rising floor of standards. And that's one of my fears about Brexit, is that there are people who don't like the fact that we have common and rising standards when it comes to the environment, workers' rights, food standards, all those things, and they may try and undermine them. And when it comes to the result of the European elections, I don't fully accept this narrative that there was a swing towards populism and the right. Actually, the Greens did better across Europe than the far right did. They had a good result too. And we saw, for example, in the UK, the Brexit Party doing no better than UKIP did, and the Front National in France doing no better than they did the time before. And there is once again a pro-European majority in the European Parliament, and that's why we were able to elect the team of leaders that we did very recently. And it was also the highest turnout in the European elections in a very long time, which I think is a message in itself, that people turned out in big numbers not to vote for populists and the hard right, but actually to vote for the centrist parties. And we saw an example of that, I think, here in Northern Ireland too, right, with the result here. Just to come, one final point.
You're doing that again.
This is the longest short reflection I've ever heard.
But just to possibly offer a way forward, you know, both the EU and the UK are saying what we can't talk about, and that's fine. People are laying out their positions, and that's what you'd expect at this stage. There is something we are saying that we can talk about, and that is the joint political declaration on the future relationship, and in that is provision for alternative arrangements. So why don't we start there, see between now and October 31st if we can flesh them out.
All right.
I'm sceptical as to whether we can, but let's at least start there. And if we come to October 31st and we haven't fleshed them out, well then there's the option of an extension, or the option of leaving with the backstop, with the alternative arrangements to be sorted out in the implementation phase.
Gregory
Campbell. Now you were keen to have a reflection on one other point there.
I think my answer was quite short, so I don't know.
Well, yes.
But you singled everybody out.
I think everyone could follow your model here.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, that's saying something in the false road, isn't it? I think what has been a bit unfair, more than a bit unfair in the past 3 years, there has been the quite understandable interest and passion, and some would say obsession, with what the UK, Northern Ireland and the Republic will be forced into accepting or negotiated into accepting as either an extraneous adjunct of the EU or completely separate from it, and not have enough concentration on what the EU will be like once we have left.
Yeah.
And this is the point I've made over and over again, but people don't seem to want to look at that. And I heard what Leo said, but you know, when you look at Alternative for Deutschland, 20 years ago, no one would have conceived of 15% of Germany, of all nations, going down that route. Nobody would have conceived of a hard right government in Italy, not just a party growing in strength, but actually holding the reins of power. So while you can look at other countries and say, well, the hard right have just sort of held their own or increased a little bit, I think you have to accept the far right has grown considerably. Now, there are other accession countries going to come in. The EU budget is going to reduce because we in the UK will be paying £9.5 billion less into the coffers, and there will be one or two other countries taking more out of a shrunken budget in the EU. What does that mean for all the remaining countries in the EU? I think they all need to think long and hard about that. And you'll not see too many net contributors saying, we want to join this club, when the rest of the world in terms of trade is burgeoning and opening up, and we should be opening up those markets rather than the shrinking market of the EU.
Quick follow-up question, because you are very succinct. John McDonald said yesterday it's almost inevitable that the Labour Party will table a vote of no confidence in the Conservative government in September. Almost inevitably said. And one way through this, people are gaming, is that Boris Johnson's really playing towards the general election. He wants to change the arithmetic, perhaps a general election in October before the Brexit exit date, perhaps. In which case, if he changes the arithmetic, he might, and this is one theory, he might do a Northern Ireland only backstop and betray you, throw you onto the red bus.
Well, we're under no illusion, and some people seem to think because we had a confidence and supply deal that in some way binds us into accepting everything that the Conservative Party want.
Yeah.
Well, we never did that in the past, and we don't do it now. And post any future election, we won't do it then either. But we will do.
He wouldn't need you if he gets the arithmetic.
Well, then he would carry on without us, as many governments, both Labour
with
and
a
Tory,
border
have
down
done
the
before.
Irish Sea.
Well, we wouldn't accept that. And
well, you wouldn't have anything to do about it.
Well, let's see what he tries to implement, if he tries to implement it. Let's see if he'll risk what Theresa May risked, with the possible outcome and consequences that she faced.
Do you trust him?
It's not a matter of trust. I don't have to trust Boris, and Boris doesn't have to trust us. What we do have to do is do business with each other. And the difference that we have with others is the business that we do brings benefit to every single person in this room. Every single person in this room. Because what we did was, and we might have got criticised and lambasted for delivering £1 billion. I'll take 1 billion criticisms, but everybody benefited. And unlike others that sit here and lambast and criticise, and you know, people can criticise all they like and lambast all they like. That deal was done to benefit everyone. And if we get in a position where we can do it again, we'll do it again. And if we can't, we won't. But we'll do whatever deal we have to do for the benefit of everybody.
All right, well, that escalated quickly. I'm going to move on to our next question. That's not to stop you having comments on this. It is connected to Brexit, so please wrap them in, and I want more responses from you. I'll step back a bit. Next question. In the event of a no-deal Brexit, should the United Kingdom government authorise a border poll on Irish unity, and should the Irish government prepare for a border poll on Irish unity? Yes. Marilyn McDonald.
Yes, is the short answer. Can I just say, I mean, you'll notice most of our, I don't know how far we're into our debate, Cathaoirleach, but we've looked across the water, and we've second-guessed and psychoanalysed Boris and Theresa and David and the whole crew of them. I mean, Brexit has again demonstrated that partition is a disaster. Partition has failed Ireland. And Brexit demonstrates the real danger of allowing the fate and our destinies, the destinies of our communities, our families, our children, our grandchildren, to rest in the hands of people Harsalia who have no interest, who have no vested interest in the success and happiness of our country. So let me say this. Brexit or no Brexit, it's my view that Irish unity is the best bet for all of us to have our destiny in our hands. But in the event, certainly in the event of a disorderly Brexit, and we've gone through all of this with Theresa May, we have rehearsed all of this now with Boris Johnson, it is inconceivable in those circumstances that anybody could argue that a crash Brexit does not represent a dramatic change in circumstances on the island of Ireland, and in those circumstances that the people would not be allowed to have their say. And of course preparation has to be made.
You can come
so
back
the Taoiseach, we've had this conversation, I've said this publicly, I've said this privately. Now is the time to begin the preparations, to have a conversation that allows access for everybody, for us to plan, for us to debate. And I include in that Gregory and Doug and people for whom a united Ireland would not be their first option. We have to realise now that Brexit changes everything. We agree on that. And the constitutional question is now on the table. Look at this Féile. It's on the table whether people choose to bury their heads in the sand or not.
Okay, well, I think if we've learnt anything about going to referenda, we shouldn't do it until we know exactly what the outcome is going to look like and until we have a firm proposition to put to people. I think it's a mistake to do it without that. So I think rushing into it off the back of chaos.
Whose responsibility is it to draw that up?
Well, I think it has to be all of our responsibilities to draw that up. We all have to have a say.
Does the Irish government have a particular
Of course they have a leadership role, but it's not solely a project for any particular government or group of people. It's something that everybody has to have a say in, even those who aren't in favour of it have to have a say in if it's going to happen, what it's like. A bit like saying we're going to have Brexit, I want to have the backstop as insurance. Doesn't necessarily mean I want to have Brexit. It just means that I want to know that I'm going to be secure.
So what they did in Scotland, as you know, what they did in Scotland. No, hang on a minute. What they did in Scotland was they put a date in the diary 2 years hence for the border poll, and then they did the work that you're talking about. They published it in an 800-page document, so that when people voted yes or no, they knew what they were voting yes or no to. You could do all of that in 2 years in Scotland. Why couldn't you do it in 2 years here?
Because we will be still dealing with the chaos and the fallout of Brexit. And I want to say, I think this is important.
But you think we'll be dealing with that in 15 years' time?
Can I say the 2 points I want to make?
I know, but I'm trying to mix it up a bit.
2 points that I want to make. The first is, should we have one? Well, I would argue that it doesn't insulate this island from the impact of Brexit. It will help in terms of the border issue. It doesn't insulate us from the economic impact. If the UK, if GB economy tanks, the economy on this island tanks with it. So we shouldn't be under any illusions that we lose interest in Brexit if there's a united Ireland. And the second thing is, Good Friday Agreement sets out the conditions for a United Ireland referendum. And it's very clear about what those conditions are in terms of...
Is it?
It's not,
actually. The Secretary of State has to make the judgment that they think there's going to be a change.
But that's like reading hieroglyphics. We don't know what that means.
Well, okay. It says that the Secretary of State has to make a judgment that he believes, and I would imagine on the basis of election and polls, that there would be a change. But it also is written in the context that we would have worked in institutions, because it was never meant to be something that would pull people apart. It was never meant to be something that would be divisive and destructive. And if we have, in the midst of chaos with no assembly, no functional conversation going on about how we deal with our own issues, and the chaos of Brexit, and a border poll, I think we risk our future for the next generation. What we need is order. What we need is certainty. And I think we get that by dealing with the crises we have in the order we can address them. We can get the Assembly sorted, and we should get the Assembly sorted. We should get Brexit resolved, and there are ways through that morass. And then we can have our structured conversation about where we go next.
Is your answer also shaped by a concern that you have? That if we were to have a border poll, it could be an existential problem for the Alliance Party, because you'd have to decide which side to campaign on.
Not really, because there would be two decisions actually. We would have to decide whether to campaign. It would be a choice we would make, whether or not we would campaign. I imagine we probably would. And then we would decide how we would campaign. But the question was, should we have a border poll? I'm going to answer a different question, which is, will we? And I think that the likelihood of a border poll increases every time the border and the Brexit gets harder. And I think that that is a fact that people are ignoring at their peril.
Brendan.
The harder the Brexit, the more likely a border poll is.
Brendan Smith,
Well, I want to see excuse me, I want to see a United Ireland. I want to see a border poll. The time of it is a very complex issue. But I have to go back to the Good Friday Agreement. It was very forward thinking that provision was included in the agreement in regard to the holding of a border poll. Because at that time, we go back to the mid-90s when those discussions was going on. It was a lot of the thought at that time, understandably, was to try to rid our society of violence and get political institutions working. And it was visionary, forward thinking to include that provision that we could have a United Ireland if the people agree both north and south. I have to say that in the last few months, we hear the term, the all-Ireland economy, used regularly, very, very, in our common day narratives now. We talk about the all-Ireland economy. Go back 20 years, we wouldn't have been talking about the all-Ireland economy. The Good Friday Agreement has given the atmosphere, has given the political dispensation to ensure that we've made huge progress on an all-Ireland basis, even though there's a lot of progress still needed. At the time that the 6 all-Ireland bodies, the 6 implementation bodies were being established and being discussed, there were issues raised at that time that they would cause constitutional difficulties. To my knowledge, all of those bodies have been in place. They do their work. Waterways Ireland, Tourism Ireland, Safe Food Ireland, the LOCS agencies. And of course it's regrettable that we didn't go on to have all-Ireland bodies in the whole area of health provision, education provision, trade promotion as well. We have Intertrade Ireland, but we could have more.
I'm going to drag you back to the question.
But could I just say that what I believe is absolutely essential, and it'll be incremental towards going to the border poll and having what I would like to see the successful outcome to that referendum. We need to have the Good Friday Agreement political institutions up and running and working in the best interest of all the people. Not alone have we an absence of the Executive and the Assembly, we have an absence of the North-South Ministerial Council, where the government, both North and South, met on a twice yearly basis.
Brendan,
and then
you said you aspired to this border poll and to United Ireland.
Yes.
Then you keep articulating reasons for not doing it.
No, I'm saying that we need...
When should the border poll happen?
We have a lot of progress and a lot of issues to deal with successfully first before I want to see a border poll.
Reasons for not doing it?
No, not reasons for doing it, but to create the climate, to put the political architecture in place and to put those institutions working, fully functioning on behalf of all the people of our island. Then I would be confident that we would have the political architecture in place to ensure that we got the outcome to the border poll that I aspire to on this island.
Taoiseach, when you were talking at the McGill Summer School, you made reference to even soft unionists, liberal unionists who might change their mind because of a no-deal Brexit and aspire to be part of the European Union through the vehicle of an agreed Ireland. Do you think in the event of a no-deal Brexit then, those people should be given an opportunity to express that view in a border poll?
I think my analysis on this is very close to what Naomi said. I think a border poll in the context of a no-deal hard Brexit in a few months' time, or even in a few years, or even next year, would not be the right way forward. It would be happening in the context of a very chaotic no Brexit, or hard deal no Brexit, where we will still have not sorted out the relationship with the UK. It would probably happen in a context when the Executive and Assembly are not up and running. And it would happen in a context in which we haven't had a proper discussion about what Irish unity really means. Because for me, it can't just mean the 6 counties being absorbed into the 26,
no
in the way that
suggesting
East Germany was absorbed into West Germany, into the Federal Republic. It would have to be a new state. And I think that if we had a border poll in that context, the Good Friday institutions not working, a no-deal hard Brexit, and no proper work or consensus found on what new state we would build together, I think we'd be very divisive. I think we'd break down probably on sectarian, possibly religious lines. I think there's a probability to be defeated as well, which would be a real shame for those of us who would like to see United Ireland in the future. And I think if it did pass, it might pass very narrowly, 51-49 or 42-48. Certainly nothing like the 71% that we got for the Good Friday Agreement here, or 97% south of the border. And I think it would result in some of the mistakes made 100 years ago when partition happened being repeated, but just the other way around. A huge number of people, those from unionist British Ulster background, being brought into United Ireland against their will.
Very low.
So here's the central contradiction in the position of An Taoiseach. He frets, as do others, that we are going to have a chaotic, disorderly scenario around the reunification question. They emphasise that we need preparation, that we need the conversation. Yes, we do, and we need to start it now. If you're that concerned about good management, which I want to see, that's what we want. I believe this is simple due diligence by the head of government in Dublin to prepare the ground, to allow the space for that very conversation that panellists have described for everybody. As I said earlier, whether or not you are for the unity proposition, that you have your shout and you have your input. So if the concern is that we will not be prepared, let's get prepared. Let's get prepared now. And can I also say this? I'm saying this as a guest in your fabulous city, the second city in Ireland. Of course, I come from the first city, as you all know. Can I just say, I am so conscious as a Dubliner, and when I'm around the 6 counties and talking to people, how fed up communities and people are being told by others that you can't discuss your future, as though there is some bar on nationalism, republicanism. Those who advocate for a free Ireland are not really to have the discussion. If we're going to have parity of esteem, Taoiseach, then it has to be genuine. And it means those that argue for the union are fully entitled to do that. More power to their elbow. Those who favour reunification should not constantly be blocked by being told, now is not the time, now is not the time. And the reality is, finally, the reality is, William and friends,
nobody's blocking the conversation.
Whether people like it or not, Brexit is for keeps. Brexit is for keeps, and the damage that it will do and the changed order that it brings is for keeps. And that means whether you want to dodge the issue or not, the conversation is happening now, and I urge you to lead from the front, you in particular, Taoiseach, because you are the head of government. And then I agree with you, Naomi, all of us have to have part of that, have to be part of that conversation.
Can I just say to the others, wave your way in, I'll bring you in. Go ahead.
That's all fine, but nobody's saying the conversation. I haven't heard a single person say the conversation can't happen. But I'm entitled to a view on when the vote should happen, just as much as you are. And I'm giving my view, which is, I think to do it off the back of Brexit in the midst of chaos is the wrong time. And that's as legitimate a view as yours is. And if you're going to shout that view down and say, I can't hold that view, what hope is there for the wider conversation about how we shape the place together?
Naomi, I'm not trying to shout anyone down. What I am saying, and please forgive me if you thought for a second I wouldn't dream of attempting to shout you down. I am saying if you are concerned about chaos and disorder, then get organised. That's my point, fundamentally.
Doug, then Gregory, go ahead.
I think we have to come to an agreement on Brexit. We have to have the institutions up and running and functioning. That has to be the prerequisite.
Yep.
And does that mean that you will not, as part of, with your government, do any preparations, whatever, on the question of a border poll, or answering the questions that many people have about the health service and everything else?
I think if we did that in the current context of us trying to come to an agreement before the 31st,
you've got a lot of people working for you.
That would be I think it would be counterproductive.
You can walk and chew gum.
But let me explain this. One of the things I've been trying to do with limited success over the past 2 years is to convince unionist politicians, to convince Brexiteers in the United Kingdom and in London that in seeking a withdrawal agreement with the backstop, that we're not trying to use Brexit to change the constitutional status of Northern Ireland. What we're trying to do with the withdrawal agreement, including the backstop, is to maintain the status quo, to protect the freedoms of citizens to travel north, south, east, west, and also to protect the freedom of us to trade north, south, east, west. It's all about maintaining the status quo.
Well, then why did you say what you said at the summer school? Because that was seen as threatening by some unionists, actually, that you were saying this Brexit thing is going to lead to the breakup of the United Kingdom.
I don't think that any unionist should see people talking about the United Ireland or the aspiration of the United Ireland as being threatening or provocative. because in my opinion it's not. If you look at the Good Friday Agreement, it talks about recognising and respecting the aspiration of those of us who want there to be a united Ireland as a legitimate aspiration and a legitimate objective, just as we respect those who want to preserve the Union forever and want to deepen it. And I think we need to do that on both sides. What I said in Glenties, I meant. If we end up in a no-deal, hard Brexit in a few weeks or a few months' time, we'd be burying our heads in the sand if we didn't think that these issues would then arise. But that's not to say that I think it would be desirable that they should arise in that context. I would much rather that we resolve Brexit, that we have the Good Friday Agreement institutions working again, and when we're in that position, then we can start to have a conversation with each other across this island as to what that new state would look like, because it would be a new state.
Doug Beattie.
Well, I have to say, Irish unity is a fair political aspiration. And you should be allowed to talk about it, you should be allowed to promote it. I have absolutely no issue with that. In exactly the same way as remaining in the Union is a fair political aspiration. And as long as we do this peacefully, then that's the way that we must promote both. And I think the discussion can be had. I don't mind the discussion being had. But I've said this before, I'm a constitutional unionist. I'm not an economic unionist. You couldn't tell me that I'd be better off in a united Ireland and then I would vote for it. But in the same way you couldn't say to a Republican, you'd be better off staying in the United Kingdom, and they'd say, okay, I'll stay in the United Kingdom. It doesn't work that way. So we all have where we are, where we stand, and we have to have the conversation, and it has to be a fair, open, honest conversation, but peaceful, and that's really, really important.
Do you sense that affection for the United Kingdom is being challenged by Brexit?
No, well, I think Brexit makes everything slightly more complicated, whether you look at what's going on in Scotland, or whether you look at what's going on here in Northern Ireland, or whether you look even possibly in Wales, or even England. And I think we sometimes forget about England and the rise of English nationalism within England. That there's many frictions going on here. But here in Northern Ireland, some people think that because I voted Remain, that if the EU is offered to me in Irish unity, that I would jump ship. That's not the case. I voted Remain because I wanted to be part of the European Union. That's why I voted Remain, not because I wanted a united Ireland. I want to be in the United Kingdom. And we look at Scotland, and somebody says, well, let's have the Scotland model, where we say we'll have a border poll, and in 2 years we'll have that border poll. This isn't Scotland. This is Northern Ireland. And if we called a border poll in 2 years without the institutions up and running, with the vacuum that we've got, with the chaos that we're seeing, it will lead to incredible destabilisation, and that's concerning. And we'll go from a conversation to something far, far worse.
All right, Gregory.
In talking about a border poll, there's one big aspect that often is overlooked and shouldn't be overlooked, because it's a fundamental consideration and it's unchanging. And it's this, that in Northern Ireland there is a block of people who cherish their Britishness, and there's a block of people who cherish their Irishness, and there is another block who would describe themselves as fitting into neither category. But the two,
some who cherish both.
Yes, there are, that's right. But the two largest blocks are those who cherish their Britishness and cherish their Irishness. Now, in any border poll, be it in 6 months' time or 26 years' time, those two factors won't change. Those two factors won't change. And they won't change in this context, in that people will be asked to consider, is the Britishness and Irishness that is currently shared in Northern Ireland, is that going to be shared in any united Ireland? And there is no concept in the Irish Republic of sharing my Britishness. None whatever. Whatever people might say about the extent of Irishness in Northern Ireland, it vastly, by light years, outweighs any consideration of Britishness in the Irish Republic. So that Britishness, Irishness and other, in the landmass that is Northern Ireland, will be central to any consideration in any border poll. And because people will know and understand that there's greater possibilities for that Britishness and Irishness and others within Northern Ireland than there ever would be in any 32 county state. That's why people at any future border poll would vote for it. And let me say something to Mary Lou McDonald. I mean, she talked about whether people like it or whether they don't, and then went on to say something. Well, whether she likes it or doesn't like it, my Britishness isn't up for negotiation. Not by her, nor any Taoiseach, nor anyone else. Not now, nor not at any time in the future. It is here, and it isn't going away anytime soon. And the sooner people waking up to that reality, and I accept that Irishness is not going to go away as well.
Yeah.
I accept that. But the problem is that some people won't accept my Britishness on this island home. And until they do, we're stuck. Therein lies some of the problem.
Oh, come on.
Gregory, can I just jump in here?
Sense of humour in the room, please.
Let me be
we
clear.
appreciate a bit of passion.
Let me be clear here.
Doug.
I'm an Irishman. I'm an Irishman, and I'm no less a unionist than you. I'm no less British than you are. I tell you what we have. The Gaelic Danes represent me. Shamrock represents me. Guinness represents me. The Orange Order represents me. God Save the Queen represents me. The monarchy represents me. The sooner we understand that this is a shared space, that we don't try and block us down into this binary us, that, and something squeezed in the middle, the better. I am very proud to be Irish, very proud to be British, very proud to be a European. Don't boil me down to one or the other.
And nobody did. Nobody did.
Do they shout as much as this in Dublin?
Yes, and
They do,
more.
absolutely do.
But surely, Gregory, just to respond to that, I mean, you will appreciate that in the Good Friday Agreement, that very issue of Irish, British or both is accommodated. Like, we shouldn't imagine either that we're starting from ground zero. I mean, there was a lot of ingenuity in 1998 that went into that agreement. And one of the things that's hardwired in is that plurality of identity. Nobody is trying to, in any way, try to negotiate you out of being British. I mean, that would be a farcical thing to do. But this constitutional question, let me say it again, let me say it more softly to you. Whether we like it or not, Brexit is happening. I didn't dream up Brexit. The people in this hall didn't dream up Brexit. But hey, it's there. So that's the point that I make. And I think these issues of identity are critical and sensitive, and I think we're well capable in a fair and a decent and an inclusive way to have conversations around them. Right. Lots of British people live in the city that I live in, and they're perfectly at home. They love it. They love the Guinness as well. And they love a whole lot more about, yes, well, there is that too. So I mean, it's not, this notion that there's some big conflict,
British Guinness,
culture wars between, it's just nonsense. I mean, we've too many ties of kinship and friendship and history for that to be the case. So let's not fight false battles.
Can I pick up on something Mary Lou said, and I think, I think the Good Friday Agreement is such an eloquent document. And I just admire so much those who were involved in negotiating it. It was one of the first things I reread when I became Taoiseach. I read it again the last couple of weeks just to make sure I had it all right in my mind. And Mary Lou said something which is at the core of the Good Friday Agreement, which is that the Good Friday Agreement says that we must recognise the right of people in Northern Ireland to be British or Irish or both and accepted as such. That's not in Bunreacht na Éireann. Bunreacht na Éireann is a constitution for an Irish Ireland. And it's a constitution that says that the Irish language is the first official language and English is a secondary language. So if we're serious about having a United Ireland, and I believe in United Ireland, it's going to be a different state. It's going to have a different constitution. It's going to have to respect that British identity. As being equal to the Irish identity. So we'd have to have that discussion among ourselves
exactly.
for quite some time.
Precisely.
First, but
let's do it. Let's do it.
That cannot be done in the context of a no deal.
But it's been a while, hasn't it?
Where the Good Friday.
I think the Taoiseach has talked himself into the proposition that I put.
Taoiseach, while you're talking, a number of people on Twitter want to know when the Irish government is going to bring through a referendum bill on the question of presidential voting here north of the border and in other parts of the world. When are you going to do that?
The bill's published already.
It's not.
No. Oh, okay. the bill is passed by cabinet anyway, and if it hasn't been published, it'll be published certainly before the Dáil resumes, and then we have to debate it in the Dáil and Shannon.
So the bill's on the way speedily.
Oh yeah, no, the bill's passed. Yeah, it is passed by. It is. Yeah, it is passed by cabinet. Just double checking. So it's just a case of us publishing.
What happened to that bill?
But it is passed by cabinet, published over the summer break,
All right.
and then to be introduced in the Dáil and Shannon. And the view is to have it operational for the next presidential election.
Okay.
So the crucial point is to make sure that at the next presidential election, any Irish citizen, no matter where they live in the world, is entitled to vote for
Brendan Chipman, go
There
ahead.
are some members of the Oireachtas here who attended a briefing some weeks ago in Leinster House following the passing of the bill by the Cabinet, by Government. The Taoiseach referred it to the Foreign Affairs Committee, which I chaired, and we have cleared it from the point of view of not needing pre-legislative scrutiny. So I have said in that committee, and some of the Oireachtas members are here, would have heard me say it before, that we will ensure that there's no delay in us processing that legislation.
No need for any further audit around it?
No, but you'll have to go back to the Dáil.
Right, for a vote.
Yeah, but it's a simple enough piece of legislation from what I have seen of it.
So we just need to see it published.
So we'll see it
Tomorrow.
published.
Yeah.
It'll be published
Tomorrow.
before the Dáil resumes. I don't know about tomorrow. The Taoiseach is on leave, but it'll be published. It will be published before the Dáil.
It'll be published when the Taoiseach gets back.
Introduced in the next.
All right, let me come to another question, which is to do with the Stormont Assembly. You made reference to this, Taoiseach. A number of the others have made reference to the need to get these Stormont institutions back together again. I mean, is there any point even talking about it? Is it now so far at the back of the political fridge, Gregory, that this is lost to us for the next period of time, months, maybe into next year? Where are we? How do we get the Stormont Assembly back?
Well, it shouldn't be. I'm looking down at the audience and I see some people here who are part of a group that suffered under the historical institutional abuse system and the inquiry that was investigated, set up and concluded some time ago. And, we've been trying to push that through the House of Commons. But that would have been done much more speedily had Stormont been up and running. We have problems with our health service. And I make no apology for saying this, that people, while they want to see Stormont back, and I think most people are agreed that that's the way to deal with these problems, that even if we had Stormont back, it wouldn't wave a magic wand for the health service, but at least local ministers would be in charge and could determine priorities much better than either a Secretary of State or a direct rule minister. So there is an absolute paramount consideration to get Stormont back and running business here. We've said it hundreds of times. We didn't bring it down. We're not standing in the way of getting. Maybe they didn't hear. Maybe they didn't hear. We didn't bring it down. I'll try again. We didn't bring it down. Do you understand? Hopefully it got across this time. And we're not standing in the way. We're not standing in the way of getting it up again.
Yeah.
Because we have no preconditions.
Right.
No preconditions, none whatsoever, about getting it up and running tomorrow. I think progress has been made in the talks.
Has it?
It has, yes. And hopefully more progress needs to be made, but it needs to be concluded.
But we keep here, every month we hear progress has been made.
Yes, I know that, and it is frustrating. And it's no less frustrating for those of us who are involved in political life than it is for those who are outside.
But Gregory, meanwhile, because we don't have an assembly, we're not getting same-sex marriage coming in after the 21st of October. Again, if we don't have an assembly by the 21st of October, we're going to have the liberalisation of Northern Ireland's abortion laws in terms of women's two issues you set your face against. Was it worth the candle not to do an Irish Language Act?
Well, you see, your premise appears to be, William, that if Stormont was back up and running, those two propositions, along with others, could be put before the Assembly and passed. That's the premise of your question.
Might not.
Right. Well, the premise appears to be, and the premise appears to be.
But it wouldn't be legislated by Westminster.
Yeah,
is my point. That was my premise.
But the problem is that it should be legislated for by Stormont. It should be, and therefore, those who don't seem to be anxious to get back into Stormont aren't really facilitating Stormont dealing with issues like that.
Right.
Because Stormont could and should be dealing with those issues. And the sooner it is dealing with those issues, and a multitude of others, because there are many people that want to see urgent things dealt with right now that affect not thousands of people or tens of thousands, but hundreds of thousands of people.
All right.
And they want to see those actioned now.
So if I'd asked this question 2.5 years ago, that's exactly the answer we would have had 2.5 years ago. We haven't moved anywhere on this, have we, Daniel?
Just the answer, Gregory. You did bring down the institutions. Corruption, dishonesty, absolute incompetence in government brought down the institutions.
One party walked out.
Incompetence and absolute corruption. And
One
not just
party
in
walked
RHA,
out, and it
NAMA,
wasn't
Red Sky.
us.
The list
And
is
you know
endless,
that.
Gregory. Take some responsibility, Gregory. Take some responsibility. How could you expect our people to accept that in government and from their government? It was unacceptable, and it's high time you took some responsibility for how you manage government. And it's because of that, and because of that entire process that we're sitting today, 2.5 years later, without a government here, without locally accountable elected politicians to deal with the many issues that we're facing. We're dealing with Brexit. We've discussed Brexit. We've mentioned how Brexit has changed everything. But we have no ministers. We've actually nobody to stand up for this place except for the Irish government. They're doing a great job, but there should be someone from here standing in the front line talking about how border communities such as mine in Strabane has been absolutely destroyed and wrecked by uncertainty, how businesses have been torn to their knees. And you know why, Gregory? Because your party's corruption in government brought down the institutions that were there to serve our people.
Daniel was alluding to Strabane. He obviously hasn't been up around the Asda car park this last few weeks or months to see the place buzzing with cross-border shoppers spending not in thousands but millions of pounds.
Exactly, and I want to see that continue. But your no deal nonsense is going to destroy the economy on these border areas.
Despite what you say, totally pejoratively about what happened when you know what brought Stormont down.
Naomi Long.
Hold on, just a point to come back on that. You have an MLA in the constituency. It's a long time since he stood on that border and actually engaged with the business community, who have huge concerns about how it's going to affect people there. So maybe that's something the DUP should consider. But it's very, very clear. The DUP are not going to take any responsibility for the collapse of the institutions. And for 2.5 years, even up until the February deal, have stood with their hands in the pockets and panicked at the last minute and said, we can't do that. Well, you have left people without ministers there that deal with the issues in health and education and roads and the economy locally. Your party, Gregory, also facilitated by some issues in Sinn Féin, but your party are solely responsible for the corruption under RHA that tore down those institutions. And ultimately,
I think that there were probably a dozen times in the run-up to the collapse of the Assembly when the writing was on the wall. And I think that if Sinn Féin and the DUP had been reading the rooms, particularly I have to say, post the general election, when I think your own party, Gregory, went into the executive incredibly bullishly and trampled all over everybody else, and it was unhelpful, I think that things could have been different. I remember sitting in the Assembly chamber when Arlene Foster made her speech as First Minister from her podium as First Minister without the authorisation of the Deputy First Minister, Martin McGuinness. And we left. Because at that point it was obvious that the joint arrangements in the Good Friday Agreement, the respect for the post, had been lost. That we had an executive that was so bitterly divided. We had already decided not to go into it because it was not an inch when we tried to raise issues like the petition of concern that were needed in order that we could actually deliver for people, which is what an assembly and executive should be about, not blocking each other, not stopping each other, but actually facilitating each other. And when we went to try and deal with those issues that weren't dealt with, and that's why we weren't in the executive. But I remember looking on that day and just thought, that's it. That speech could have been made from the back benches. Didn't have to be made as First Minister. But that wasn't the point where it started to unravel. That was when it became obvious it couldn't be restored. It was going to fall apart. Yeah. And there were no attempts made in the run-up to that to try to ameliorate the situation, to try to dial down the rhetoric, to try to calm the situation. We had something precious. We had everybody at one stage in that executive working together, pulling in the same direction, not always seeing eye to eye. But when you're around the table and you've thrown your lot in with the executive and you're committed to collective responsibility, you're at least dealing with each other in a civilised way. And I have to say, Gregory, if anything speaks to the reasons why we can't have civilised government, it is the way you started answering this question. You aren't being respectful. You're not being respectful of the people who are listening. Your party colleagues were disrespectful of the people that were in government with, including on occasion ourselves. Very much so. You need to be able to work with others. The gaps between the parties, as far as I'm concerned, for all the talking, have not closed, because they're not being addressed. We are doing a lot of good work in the talks about how we could make the Assembly function better, but how we could deal with all these other technical issues, how we can make it more transparent. All of that is really important, and I'm not dismissing it. But the fundamental issues that the Assembly died on were about respect. They were about people recognising other people's rights, respecting them and facilitating them in government. And I haven't seen that dynamic change. If anything, I think the discourse has got worse. Now, I'm told there's an intense process going on. I don't see it and I don't feel it, and I've been around these processes for a very long time. We need to get our act together, and I say this as somebody who isn't in the Assembly anymore for now, before Gregory says it, isn't in the Assembly anymore for now. But I have a vested interest, like every single person in this room and every single person on this island, to see it up and running again. It's a soul-destroying thing to watch something that is so precious being torn apart, and we need to get it done.
Mary. I mentioned earlier what Westminster did with same-sex marriage and the liberalisation of access to abortion. Given that it was a British government commitment in the annex of the St Andrews Agreement, a commitment to the Irish Language Act, would you like to see Westminster doing the same with the Irish language, doing exactly what they did with same-sex marriage and abortion, bring it through Westminster and take it off the Stormont debating table altogether?
Well, I don't want to see Westminster legislating actually for anything in this part of Ireland. We're well capable of doing that ourselves, but I do want to see the British government live up to and honour its commitments, and one of those was Act Gaeilge.
You heard a lot of applause in this room for what Westminster did on same-sex marriage. Of course I did, and
I understand it, and I share that view, because all of us know. Look, we know why the institutions came down, and we know why they're still down. Because the DUP and rejectionist unionism exercises a veto on people's rights. And the time has come now, and sometimes these things are painted up as Sinn Féin demands. You know, you hear that in the media. These are Sinn Féin red lines. They're nothing of the sort. These are decent democratic standards in an open, modern, democratic society. And the DUP needs to understand, whatever their personal theology on marriage or on women's bodies, or whatever their view of Teanga Gaeilge, the reality is that the citizens now living in this part of Ireland will no longer tolerate being kind of hedged into some backwater between the Tories at number 10 and the DUP here with the swings tied up. That day is over, that day is gone, and that needs to be recognised. On the talks themselves, the issues haven't been resolved. It's as simple as that. And I just want to tell you, it is not for the lack of hours, hundreds of hours of discussion and rehearsal. We know what the issues are and we know what the resolutions are. The question is this: if Gregory is true to his word and he says he understands Irishness needs to be cherished, I think that's the first time I've heard him say that, and I really, really welcome that. So less of the curry my yogurt and more of the Uachtarán. And if you believe in the dignity and equality of every person, every man, woman and child, British, Irish, neither or both, just recognise that people as of right must enjoy their rights, equal in the eyes of the law. That shouldn't be something that's seen as a favour done or something conferred upon citizens on the say-so of any political party, including the DUP. And until we get those issues sorted, you couldn't credibly go back to people and say, listen folks, we have government now that you can believe in, that can be sustainable and that can deliver for every citizen. So very simple, yes, we want the institutions back. Of course we do. We're almost 3 years out. Yeah. It's a disgrace that we're still in this position. The challenge now for the DUP, quite frankly, is to wise up, get out of the 1600s and join the rest of us in the modern world in Ireland.
I promised Gregory a quick response, and then I'll come to you, Brendan, right after Gregory.
Mary Lou McDonald said there that Sinn Féin don't want Westminster to legislate. They were quite happy for Westminster to legislate in terms of welfare reform because they didn't want to. It seems to be when we get the hard choices, Sinn Féin would prefer that others took the decisions, and then they can come back and say, well, it wasn't us, Gov, it wasn't us. Now we'll pick up the pieces after the big bad.
No. We fought Tory austerity, and we make no apology for it, Gregory.
And then we'll move on beyond that. Just the issue about. I've often said that Irishness should be cherished. The issue of there must be a hearing defect in the hall, William. I think. I've often said that the issue that Mary Lou mentioned about my reference in the Assembly.
To yogurt.
Yeah. When people constantly abuse Irish, all day, every day, all week, every week,
by speaking
so that every question, statement, comment of every kind is predicated by the use of Irish. I say, if I were to start every comment on environmental health, education, roads, health service with Féile, after about the 10th or 12th time, people would say, Gregory, you're abusing the Ulster Scots, and they would be right. They would be right. So if people stop abusing that, I won't confront it. If they keep abusing it, I'll confront them. It's very, very simple. It's not too difficult to work out. Hopefully we can move on. Let's try and make progress. Let's get the institutions back in place. Right. I know who was responsible for bringing them down. Daniel and others might try and differ and rewrite history. People have been trying that for years and failing. We'll fail again, I'm sure. But we have to build for the future. Whatever about the past, we've got to build for the future and get back into Stormont, get the institutions up and running, not just for a section of the community, but for everybody in the community.
Brendan.
Maybe that should start by respecting someone's right to speak their language, first of all, Gregory.
Quite happy.
Maybe.
Quite happy to do that.
Brendan Smith.
Most of the panelists referred earlier to the need for proper preparation if you're putting a plebiscite or referendum before the people. I believe that the absence of the executive and the assembly in Stormont has ensured that we don't have a common voice for Northern Ireland in relation to the Brexit preparations. And again, I refer to the importance not just of those two important political institutions, but of the North-South Ministerial Council, where a lot of hugely important work for all of this island went on an unsung basis between departments and ministers on a daily basis. That would have been extremely beneficial in preparing all of our country for Brexit in whatever format it takes. But could I just say one other thing that we have to be alarmed about? is the recent commentary from the UK Institute of Government, where they raised that in the absence of the political institutions in Stormont and a no-deal Brexit, they were broaching the subject of a return to direct rule.
Yeah.
But that, under no circumstances could that be countenanced. It would be a huge breach of relationships between Ireland and Britain, and a breach of the Good Friday Agreement. And outgoing, the former Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. Lidington, in July, while they were discussing the Brexit Committee report on Brexit, he inferred that that could be the route. And we have this Institute report now. I don't think there has been much political commentary on that, but we want to get a clear message across that in whatever shape Brexit takes, that there can be no diminution in the workings or the potential of the Good Friday Agreement, which is an international treaty overwhelmingly endorsed by all the people of this island.
But Brendan, isn't this de facto direct rule already? The Westminster's passing the budget, they're passing laws. What's the difference? It's de facto
What
right
I'm
now,
saying
isn't
is
it?
we need our political institutions back up and
Sure,
running and working and functioning
you
in
know,
the best
you've
interest.
been paying attention to this conversation. This doesn't sound like the UN Security Council, does it?
Well, I would think that the talks
What are the
behind
chances?
doors would be of a quieter vein and no microphones needed. And I don't think there'll be any hearing deficits either, as Gregory referred to. And I sincerely hope that progress can be made. It's absolutely essential.
Taoiseach, do you have any advice for them in terms of forming a government, or if not, a rugby team, doing something together?
Well, as someone who's been involved in two coalitions, one majority coalition with Labour Party and now a minority government with the Independent Alliance and Independence with a constant supply agreement with Fianna Fáil, I know how difficult it can be to form governments, but I know it can be done, and I know you can make them last as well. And I think there is a responsibility on all of us, but particularly the parties in Northern Ireland, to come together and have those institutions up and running. I remember before the institutions fell, it would have been normal for me to travel to Armagh a couple of times a year to meet my counterparts, as a minister meeting my counterparts from Northern Ireland. And it would have been normal for us twice a year to effectively have a joint cabinet meeting, although we never called it that and wouldn't call it that, between the Irish cabinet and the executive, sometimes in Stormont, sometimes in Farmley. And it's only when those institutions and interactions are gone that you actually realise how valuable they were. And it's a real regret for me that they're not operating at present. And whatever the reasons for the Assembly falling and the Executive falling, I really think it's imperative that they're re-established this autumn before the 31st of October, because we do need that legitimate voice speaking for Northern Ireland. Before they collapsed, we had a joint letter which Arlene Foster and Martin McGuinness were able to sign, pointing out that Northern Ireland had a unique history, unique geography, pointing out the kind of things that they wanted to see protected in the event of Brexit.
Exactly.
That hasn't been possible since, because when you're not in coalition, when you're not in government, you're retrenched to party positions, and it's party on party. When you're a minister in government, you have to think about business. If you're the Minister for Business, if you're the Minister for Health, you have to think about the medicine supplies. If you're the Minister for Education, you have to think about what's going to happen to students and Erasmus and school fees. And that thinking has been absent for the last 2.5 years. And that's why I very much appeal to the parties to come together with our support from both governments to re-establish that executive and assembly as a matter of urgency before the 31st of October, because we need your voice as part of this now, and we'll certainly need it after the 31st of October if we're not in a position to come to a deal.
But realistically, there's no chance of that before the 21st of October, is there?
I don't think it's impossible, and
Really?
Maybe I'm overly optimistic, and maybe
Really?
I don't think it's
Taoiseach.
impossible. And I think we were thereabouts February of last year. Wasn't
we were
that
there,
far off.
yeah.
Yeah, but we didn't have an abortion amendment and a same-sex marriage amendment tied to the 21st of October then. There's no chance of this happening before the 21st of October, is there?
Yeah. Well, if we manage,
Really?
if we can get the arrangements on the petition of concern,
Maybe the 22nd or the 23rd, not the 21st,
if we can get the petition of
Ideally before the
concern
31st, anyway.
reformed, then I believe we can do this quickly, because then we will be able, because let's be clear, it's not about two issues. It's too simple to say this is about abortion reform and equal marriage. It isn't. It's about being able to make progress all the time. There are going to be other issues that are going to emerge from the woodwork over the next 20, 30 years, and we're going to have to be able to respond to them. And that requires a different structure that allows us to do that. It's not about two issues. It's about being able to respond to what the community want in a progressive way, and that requires reform, and the petition of concern is the place we need to start.
And actually, that's one of the areas, that is one of the areas where there has actually been good discussion and solid proposals put. I think we can agree on that.
On the petition of concern.
But yes, but it is also about those particular outstanding issues. And I don't believe that there could be a credible deal presented without a resolution, a credible resolution to those issues. I think that's just a reality, and therein lies the difficulty, William, with our
and we are literally in the last 2 minutes, literally, which means you get about 15 seconds each. That question that politicians hate, which was asked of the Tory leadership candidates, which of your political opponents in a different party around this table do you most admire? And why? Wait, Daniel, you look really keen to go. Which of your political opponents and why?
Well, I have to say Doug Beattie.
Oh, come on. Well, sure, he was sounding like the SDLP earlier, wasn't he?
More and more every day.
Just killed Doug's career now. Doug, that was a joke. That was a joke. Doug Beattie.
Well, I remember.
Don't say Daniel. Come on.
I did previously once at another, so I'm not going to. But I did the Think 32 podcast a number of weeks back, and I was asked that very same question. And strangely enough, I said the Taoiseach. And I'm not passing everything to the left, but I did say the Taoiseach. And here's the reason why I said the Taoiseach. And it's not because we agree on everything, and we certainly don't on Brexit. But I tell you what, it does take a degree of bravery to bring forward a referendum on same-sex marriage. It does take a degree of bravery to bring forward a referendum on abortion reform. And they could have went wrong. They could have lost them. He could have found himself in a more difficult position than he is now. But he pushed ahead with it. And I think that is what we really need, is that kind of leadership, that kind of respect, that kind of vision. And that's why I pick Leo.
No pressure, but it has gone to the left so far.
I think that's about to end.
Thanks so much, Doug. That was very kind. But I would say I was only one of many thousands of people who made those changes happen, and I'm proud to be part of the government that put those questions to the people. But it wasn't because of me; it was because of a major grassroots movement across our country, which has helped me to be the person that I am today, and I'm grateful to them for that. But I do really thank Doug for those kind words. But I'm afraid I'm not going to reciprocate. I don't see him as an opponent for a start. But second, so I'd have to say Brendan Smith.
You jumped one.
One for a very personal reason, and the day I was nominated to become Taoiseach, he abstained, and Mary Lou voted against me. So it wasn't for him. And his party, I wouldn't be Taoiseach, and we wouldn't have the government that we have now. But also, secondly, and I know the constant supply agreement we have with Fianna Fáil is imperfect. I know we rub against each other and have difficulties all the time. But when I look at the mess over in the House of Commons, how political parties can't work together, how political parties, even within themselves, are fighting with each other. I look at what I see in Dáil Éireann, and I'm glad that the two major parties have been able to come together and to form a consensus in particular on issues around Brexit, and has made my hand stronger the fact that we've had that consensus around Brexit, involving Sinn Féin and Labour as well, but particularly Fianna Fáil in facilitating this government, at least until we have Brexit resolved. And that's why I admire him as my opponent.
And you could use that on the election poster next time, Brandon. I wouldn't have been Taoiseach without you.
Mary Lou might though.
Mary Lou.
Oh, Mary Lou will. She's so well. Leo, we're doing so well. I felt just a surge of confidence before you. So Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil are best friends, and they're in government together. I wish to God they weren't. You've asked who on the panel specifically, and the person I'm going to mention I don't regard as an opponent.
They don't have to be on this panel. No,
yeah, well, they, as it happens, they are. We might as well, keep it that way. We all know that politics is very male. Still, the men are great and necessary and welcome, but it's very, very important that if we say that we're going to create a diverse society, that we actually lead from the front on that as well. So I admire actually a good number of people with whom I have huge political differences, like fundamental. I admired the Taoiseach for a number of reasons. In terms of him becoming our Taoiseach, I think it was very significant for broad Irish society, but you didn't pick me and I'm not picking you. And Shinn. So the person...
It really is just... I think we both agree.
I know. So we won't do that.
Write the columns.
I know, we could both write them. So I am actually going to say now...
You just looked like a Taoiseach did there, just for a moment. You did.
I'm going to say Naomi Long. I think Naomi is formidable. I have said to her many times, and she can confirm this, wait until she hits the Dáil. She's going to be brilliant. She's a woman in She's a woman in leadership, and I think we managed to get 2 Remain MEPs over the line, and good on you, Naomi. So
we're feeling the love. Brandon Smith.
Thank you very much. Could I just say that I'm in the august company of 2 party leaders from the Oireachtas here with me, much above my pay grade, so I couldn't aspire to choose either of them. And I have to say, just on a very serious note, I have to say the Oireachtas since 2016, since the Brexit referendum, and a lot of the work was on, nobody hears about a committee level and that. I chair one of the committees. People from different parties and non-parties have a role in chairing different Oireachtas committees comprising TDs and senators. A huge amount of excellent work has been going on in a very positive manner, dealing with Brexit issues day in, day out. When it came to preparing the legislation in advance of the 29th of March deadline, I have to say very complex, what was known as omnibus legislation that covered every government department, that went through the Oireachtas in very quick time. And I have to say, people of all parties and none really have donned the green jerseys, a hackneyed phrase, but they have worked in the very best interests, as they see it, of our people in preparing for Brexit. And I have to say, I can't aspire to the much below the pay grade of my 2 august colleagues.
You're filibustering here.
So I not choose anyone this evening.
No, Brandon! That was the biggest preface to a nothing burger I ever heard in my life. Nobody.
I put all my Oireachtas colleagues in that. So I did.
Gregory Campbell.
Thank you so much. Delighted to be here. You give us 15 seconds.
I know. 15 political seconds, though.
Everybody drove coach and horses through it?
Yep.
Isn't that right?
Yep, they did.
I won't. I've looked up and down the panel. Nah.
All right. You weren't limited to the panel. Just to be clear. Naomi Long,
Well,
you're the last voice of the evening. No pressure. Make it good.
I am. I thought we were going to keep going left, and I was worried.
You're going to go for Jerry.
There you go. But, I mean, I was very direct when I was asked earlier about who I blamed for Brexit, so I'm going to be more oblique when I answer this one. I was going to say Doug, just to reassure him, after we had a massive row on Twitter yesterday.
Yeah.
But we're still speaking, and I actually like that about Doug, that we do have rows on Twitter, and we do still speak. For Doug, it's because he's gracious, and because me, I know it's a punishment for him. So I never stop speaking to anybody. Isn't that right, Gregory?
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's
I'm not going to say who I admire the most.
You have to. That's the idea.
I'm not. But what I'm going to say something else. You said I'd get the last word, William, so I'm going to take it. I think politics only works if you can believe that your biggest foe and your biggest enemy is capable of doing admirable things sometimes. I think unless you can actually believe that your opponents in politics are capable of doing good things and are capable of working with you on issues where you agree, even though you might completely disagree on lots of other things, then I don't think politics ever works anywhere. So my answer would be, I see admirable qualities in everybody at the table. And I think if politics is going to work, we need to spend more time looking for what is admirable in each other and trying to promote that.
That was the most alliance answer to that question I've ever heard. Wasn't it? Shinn, we're done. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you, panel.